So now that we have our updated state object, instead of just logging it out, we're now going to render it to the canvas. So for this, we'll create a function called render, and inside it, we're then going to talk to our context object. Now, as we mentioned in the first couple of videos, we want to use a begin path. And now that we have this start and also the end, when we begin moving our mouse, we can then start to draw following our mouse positions. Now, as we discussed in the initial video, we want to first move to a particular coordinate, and then we want to start using a line to and start drawing. We then want to go ahead and finish up the stroke with calling .stroke. So, where do we move to and what lines do we in fact draw? So our state object, as we look, it has state.start. Now our move to, as you can see, accepts an X and Y. So the reason that I've added these X and Ys to our state object is so we can reference them directly. So we can say state.start.x and state.start.y. This will then move our context and then begin drawing wherever our mouse is. So we don't actually follow it from wherever we enter the canvas and start drawing, only when we will subsequently click and then start drawing. We then want to add the state.end.x followed by the state.end.y. Now what we are essentially going to do after calling this render function is then have to take the end and then pass it off to the start, which means we are essentially going to replace both of the coordinates at once. Anytime we move the mouse, you can see that we're adding an end property. And anytime we then call our render, we're then going to take that end value of X and Y and add it back to the start. This is essentially so our canvas can draw frame by frame and give us ultimately what looks like a complete single signature. So to do exactly that, we then need to reassign our state object. We can spread in any existing state, and we then want to override our start. Now for this, all I'm going to do is spread in the end, because anytime we have a mouse move event, we then update the state with the end. And then when we render, we're then going to take that value and then pass it off to the start, which means on the next calculation, we then move to where we left off and then start to draw a new line of where the mouse is. Now for us to kick things off, we need to have this function, and this is why I've used a function declaration instead of a constant. So if you have used a constant, you want to then change it back to this pattern so we can call this function recursively. Now we've wrapped this in parentheses, this will then call our function. Now if we save this out, this isn't actually going to do much for us. So what we need to now do is inside our render function is then recursively invoke it by using window requestAnimationFrame. Now this requestAnimationFrame, we then simply pass in the callback of render. We can save things out and you can see that at the top we have a black dot. Now if I start to move my mouse around, we then have wherever I'm drawing, our canvas is then plotting accordingly, because every single time we are updating the state on the mouse move, drawing, and then completing the stroke. And any time that the browser recognizes that we've made a paint, we can then, using requestAnimationFrame, tell the browser that we wish to then perform an update. The browser then will schedule this in for us and then keep calling our render callback. So the reason that we've done this is because we want to render the initial frame and then render subsequent callbacks, which is why if we refresh, if I enter the canvas here, you can see that we now have a line from the top left all the way down, which we don't really want because we want to bind to a mouse down event, and only when we are then clicking and dragging, we want to then start drawing. So to do exactly this, we're going to jump into our state object, and I'm going to add a drawing property and give it a value of false. So what we'll do is use our mouse events to work out whether we are in fact in a drawing mode. So when we initiate a mouse down, we've then clicked, which means that our drawing should really be set to true. What we can then do inside our render function is detect whether we're drawing and then start to update our canvas context accordingly. If we then move the mouse, we want to keep our drawing. However, on our mouse up, we then want to stop drawing. So if we attach a new event listener, we can say mouse up, we don't need any event information inside of here. So we can simply reassign a new state object. So if we spread in our existing state, we can then say drawing and set it back to false. Similarly, if we then take our mouse up function, and we're also going to use a mouse leave. And I'll explain why in a moment, because if we click and drag and then come back on, you can see that our canvas is still drawing when we exit and enter the canvas. So what we're essentially going to do as soon as we leave, we're then going to set the drawing back to false. So we're no longer going to recognize any user input. So if we save this out, this isn't going to do too much. As you can see, the behavior is as it was. So now that we've added this drawing state boolean, we essentially want to detect it inside of here. So inside of our render, we can say if state.drawing, then we in fact want to call our context, reassign the state. However, we do want to leave our requestAnimationFrame outside of our conditional statement because we still want to call it, which means if we hover around, we don't see anything, but we can then start to draw on our canvas. And this gives us a nice mouse down, which then initiates our drawing state. We can then mouse up and completely release the canvas. We can click and drag off. This then stops the canvas from drawing, as you can see. And we now have a nice signature, or the capability to go ahead and write our signature. Now Canvas has a lot more built in. We can also download this as an image. If we were to right click, you can see we have save image as. So not only is Canvas a great place for us to draw something like this, we can in fact convert video perhaps, or text, or any user drawings into an image and then go ahead and download it directly, which we'll come on to in the next few videos as well. So I hope you liked this video. This is a nice recursive function for us to then pass off to requestAnimationFrame. We've then looked at the begin path, move to, line to, and stroke. We've created a simple state object where we're then updating the start and the end of the states every time we have a mouse move event. We then toggled this drawing property when we want to leave or when we let go of the mouse inside of our canvas. So in the next video, we're going to set up one more event, which is going to allow us to clear our canvas. What I'm going to do is set it up so when we double click on our canvas, it will then clear it appropriately.